the newsagents.
Now, this country has a proud past and a bright future. And I believe in that innate confidence in ourselves that has always run through our island story. And just as we're proud of all that we created, invented and discovered in our past, so we can be confident and optimistic about what we will achieve in our future. But I'm not blind to the fact that people are frustrated with our party and frustrated with me. Things have not always been easy, and we have not got everything right. But we are the only party in this election with the big ideas to make our country a better place to live.
We are 3 weeks in, there are 3 weeks to go, and Rishi Sunak has launched his campaign here at Silverstone with special sound effects being provided by a racing car going past us as we speak. Can he make the difference?
That might even be Brad Pitt, more of which later. Rishi Sunak gave a pretty polished performance. It was no autocue, it was a warm crowd, and there was no heckling. But we're asking a bigger question today, I think. 3 weeks to go until the election. When Rishi speaks, when the Prime Minister stands up, are people ready to listen? Welcome to the Newsagents.
It's John.
It's Emily.
And the jokes sort of write themselves, don't they, when you come to Silverstone to launch your campaign? We're turning a corner, we're accelerating, we haven't stalled, oh, the wheels have come off, everything. You could just go on and on and on.
Yeah, he clearly chose this spot because it feels like the perfect metaphor. When you see it in person, actually what you realise is how deserted it is. I mean, there is not a human soul, really, as far as the eye can see. There are no voters. There are no 67-year-old female GPs trying to heckle from the crowds. He's found somewhere, in other words, where there is very little chance of reality interacting with his campaign manifesto launch. And I think that might be relevant because the word he kept using today was safe. Safety, safe. He's trying to tell you that the Labour Party are dangerous. If they come into power, their policies will be dangerous. And if you want the safe pair of hands, then you have to stay with the Conservatives. And I guess for safe, you could read slightly lacking in courage and boldness when it came to what was offered today in the manifesto.
I'm not sure I agree with that. I think the phrase that if there was a word cloud of Rishi Sunak's speech, it would be tax cuts. Tax cuts, tax cuts, tax cuts, tax cuts, tax cuts. Yeah, exactly. Red leather, yellow leather. I mean, you could carry on like that. But that's what he wanted to stress, that the Tories would cut your taxes and Labour were going to increase them. It's the oldest message that you can rely on in campaign politics. I think the problem that Rishi Sunak has, and you alluded to it in the introduction, we'll talk about it, which is about whether people are listening. I think the other problem is that if you just looked at that manifesto fresh, had nothing back to go on over what had happened over the past 14 years, you'd say there are a lot of good ideas in there. There's a lot of creative thinking. They've got a lot of ambitions for the country. Whether they can all be met in the way that the Tories say they can be met is another question. The problem is that they are saddled with that weight around their ankles of the past 14 years, where you are putting right some of the things that you have created.
Yeah, I mean, I started at the back of the manifesto to read it, and there is a whole chapter on farming, and there's a whole chapter on fishing. And if you didn't know anything about how much Brexit has decimated the farming economy and the fisheries economy, you'd say, oh, these look like good ideas. The trouble really, I think, for the Conservatives is that when they're using words like closing tax loopholes and finding efficiencies, you have to say, well, for Christ's sake, if you haven't closed a tax loophole after 14 years, are you sure you know where it is? If you haven't found your efficiencies after 5 different Conservative Prime Ministers, how efficient do you think you're about to be in the next year? It just rings a bit hollow, given that this is not a fresh start. This is not a new lap, insert the puns as we go. This is pretty much a continuation of a very long circuit.
I mean, my own observation about that was one about a policy, which again you thought, really, which was about housing and where we need to build more houses, is in London there's not enough population density. We need to have the population density of a Paris or some other big cities. And you think, really? So you're not really saying you should build more houses in leafy constituencies where Conservatives have their MPs you build them in the inner city, which already feel like they are pretty crowded places. When he said we're going to cut down on government outside consultants, and you think, oh, come on, that is not going to get you the numbers of billions to
save
save.
100 billion.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
That'll be another NHS just waiting to cut those waiting lists.
Let's just have a little listen to a bit more of what Rishi Sunak had to say in his manifesto launch.
But I'm not blind to the fact that people are frustrated with our party and frustrated with me. Things have not always been easy, and we have not got everything right. But we are the only party in this election with the big ideas to make our country a better place to live. Labour offer no solutions to our problems. They would only make them worse. And all a vote for reform or the Liberal Democrats does is allow Labour to do whatever they want to our country. Do not forget that Keir Starmer is asking you to hand him a blank cheque when he hasn't said what he'll buy with it or how much it's going to cost you.
In the speech, there were 2 mentions of Brad Pitt, and that's because Brad Pitt is actually filming a film right here. We've been told under no circumstances to accidentally get Brad Pitt in our shot, so we're trying our hardest. Little mention of Thatcher, but not very much. Little mention of Lawson, not very much. Very little mention of any of the other past Conservative Prime Ministers.
Harold Macmillan got a brief mention. Harold Macmillan got the merest nod to about housing. There was not much of that. And, you know, Rishi Sunak has got a job to do, which he knows he's 20 points behind. He knows he's got to turn it around. They know they need something to happen. And this was his last big set-piece occasion before polling day. It's hard to think of what are the other kind of occasion where you've got the nation's attention in the way that you have on Manifesto launch. And I think that, you know, given the missteps there have been since he came out and got soaked in Downing Street and seems to have been pissing down on him ever since, it was his opportunity.
I mean, I'd say, you know, there hasn't been a misstep this morning because the questions from the press were pretty varied. And I think that tells you that everyone was going on different sorts of things. A couple of people asked why there wasn't a bit more of a vision, a bit more boldness. And a couple of the right-wing papers, the sort of Tory-friendly papers, asked Rishi why he hadn't gone the whole hog on the ECHR and declared, as some I think were hoping, GB News and The Sun in particular, that he would announce that a Conservative Party would be ready to leave the ECHR, a massive, massive breakup with international law. And he said he wouldn't do that, but he would put national security first. He stuck to his lines, in other words.
Funnily enough, in the questions from the press, I don't think there was anything that Conservative HQ would think, oh God, now we've got a problem.
I mean, this sounds ridiculous, but I sat there with the manifesto on my knee, and it's called the Conservative and Unionist Conservative Party Manifesto 2024, and a little bit of me thought, oh my God, imagine if this was the last one of its kind, if the party fractures, you know, in a sort of post-election world where it starts calling itself very different things or more than one thing. And so I guess for him to have got through questions about taxation and spending, but without any major gaffes, either means he's done really well, or else it means that the attention is already elsewhere. And that was how we started our chat with the Home Secretary, James Cleverly. Rishi Sunak seemed to be pretty relaxed up there, pretty happy with the message he was offering today, and yet it feels like people have stopped listening, doesn't it?
No, I don't, how many doors do you knock on a week?
Tell us about your...
No, go on. How many doors do you knock on in a week? How many? Give it a nice round number. Is it near?
We're not campaigners, okay? Exactly, so we don't knock on doors.
Exactly,
we do talk to voters. We don't knock on doors
okay,
because we're not trying to get them to vote.
How many voters do you talk to?
We've talked to quite a few.
How many voters do you talk to in a week? I was talking to hundreds this week. So when you say people are saying this, well, I'm telling you what people are saying. What people are saying is that they are massively unimpressed with Labour. They often tell me there are frustrations with what has happened over the last couple of years. They feel that taxes have been too high, which is why they brought them down. They've said the cost of living did hurt, which is why we've brought inflation down. They want to know that we're controlling our borders, that we're putting police on the streets, which is why we've got plans for all those things. But when I say to them, so okay, you've got these frustrations, does that mean you're going to vote Labour? Their faces scrunch up and they go, oh God, no, we're not going to vote Labour. So there is everything to play for at this election because Labour have not sealed the deal. Now, I don't know if that accords with what you're hearing when you speak to voters, but I speak to voters both in my own constituency and the constituency of friends around the country, and I'm hearing that over and over and over again.
Okay, you're asking our opinion. What I would say is that
I'm asking about fact.
No.
What facts have you heard from voters?
Well, it's anecdotal, isn't it? It's only a small representative sample. I mean, look, we read opinion polls. Are you saying that the opinion polls are completely misrepresenting the mood of the country?
Well, the mood that I'm picking up when I speak to actual voters, literally hundreds of voters a week, every week through this campaign and long before the election was called, they tell us there are frustrations, there are things they want us to fix. That's what the manifesto sets out for the future, a bold set of choices for a better future. But they also tell me that they are massively unimpressed with Labour in general and Keir Starmer in particular. That then gives us something to work with between now and polling day.
Do you think they're just being nice to you because you're the Home Secretary, maybe?
They'd be nice to me. You know me, I'm James Clear. No one chooses to be nice to the Home Secretary.
All right, let me ask you something. We've got kids the same age, right? We've got boys the same age. We've talked about that before. Do you ever worry that there's so little in your offering for young people? And I've seen what you said about rents, and I've seen what you've said today about deposits, and I've seen what you said about the right to buy, which has come very late in the day.
What have the rumours ever done?
Well, I'm really interested. When you speak to the young, when you speak to your kids' friends, you know what they're saying. They're saying the Tories are a party for old, rich people. That's the message that comes back.
So this manifesto has cut the taxes for people trying to get on the housing ladder for the first time, typically young people. It's cut tax very significantly for the self-employed. A lot of young people, designer makers, people working in the digital economy, lots of self-employed young people. There's a big tax advantage for them there now. For the people who have got young children, through the changes that we're making to the child benefit taxation system, benefit for them. And as I say, the people who really, really feel it most when inflation runs away are the people who spend more of their income in non-discretionary ways.
Okay, so why aren't the young with you then? If all these things are what your party, the Conservative Party, is doing, why do the young not feel it? Why can you not get voters, apparently, under the age of around 60 to support you?
Well, look, we will take this message, we will take our record, as the Prime Minister said, best readers in the Western world, our education attainment is improving. This is a massive impact on young people, young families. We will take that message. We're not going to be put off by the opinion polls. We will keep campaigning, we'll keep winning the argument.
But you're trying to send them all to do voluntary, training at the weekends and force them to do that. I mean, I don't know how well that's going down with your kids' friends or their schoolmates when that gets out.
So I did youth policy when I was at City Hall, and one of the things that was a real game changer was the impact of young people's involvement in a whole load of voluntary
They're doing that anyway. They're volunteering anyway. Loads of kids volunteering,
Loads of them do, but loads of them don't. The numbers have dropped, particularly since COVID, where a lot of young people slipped into the habits of living their lives kind of virtually and indoors. And in almost all cases, people say that they wish they'd been involved in volunteering earlier. It's 25 days over the course of a year. 95% of the people will do it in some kind of non-military capacity, and we believe that it will kickstart a habit of volunteering in many young people, and that is a net benefit both for the individual and for society as a whole. We've got to do one more.
James, let me just ask you one more question, which is about, you said that you're going to be judged on your record. Isn't that the problem? That you're trying now with this manifesto to undo some of the things that for 14 years, where people have seen their taxes go up, where they've seen all sorts of changes which have had a detrimental effect on them, whether it be on child benefit, on all sorts of other things, where people feel worse off now than they did when the Conservatives came to power in 2010.
Labour Party, when in government, borrowed and borrowed and borrowed and borrowed. And borrowing is deferred taxation. They shunted taxation.
They also spent on public services.
They borrowed and borrowed and borrowed.
What on the NHS waiting list compared to when Labour left office and what they are now?
They borrowed and borrowed and borrowed, shunting that financial pressure into the future, which then we had to deal with. That note, there's no money left, was more true than people realise. We then had COVID. We then had the war in Ukraine, and we've done the right things in difficult times. What we're now able to do, because we brought down inflation, because the Prime Minister has managed the economy well, we are now able to target the tax cuts, and we really, really do believe that people will look at this prospectus, compare it with the Labour Party, and they will see this as favourable.
So go on, how many doors have you knocked on?
Well, not that many. But the thing that I'm enjoying most about this election campaign, which is the novelty of the 2024 election, is the number of people who have got video phones. And so you've seen on clips of, I'm David Cameron and I'm here to vote or campaign on.
Like that. He's a lord, John. He's a lord.
I'm here on behalf of such and such MP. Oh, no, you don't. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. And they have to go.
Yeah.
But it's all been
There is
videoed.
a rumour, and I can say unsubstantiated as such, that some MPs are deciding to turn up carrying Amazon packages in the hope that when they press the button on the doorbell, they will be let in. Yeah.
And when they find that it hasn't got the pair of trainers they were hoping for, and it's just a Tory MP looking for your vote, they slam the door pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, I guess that is the question. Is the door knocking, which always used to be a fundamental part of electioneering, still where it is? Because, you know, my sense is, well, we've seen what the Conservatives and Labour are trying to do with social media. We've seen how, I mean, I think we were used. We should talk about this actually, because we interviewed Keir Starmer in Davos and we did a quick fire with him where we said,
Westminster.
we said, you know, lots of different questions. Just make up your mind very quickly. We said, do you prefer Davos or Westminster? It was a big moment because it was Keir Starmer's first time in Davos, as it was mine. And we said, which do you prefer? And he said straight away Davos. And the Conservatives have actually turned this into a clip, which kind of hints at conspiracy great replacement theory. It's really uncomfortable, actually.
It really is, but that is where the targeting is much more important than just knocking on people's doors, which seems so random. You can get to people via their social media where you micro-target. You've got that sort of data. This is the bits of elections that we don't see up front, which is there's much more campaigning going on where they're looking at data, where they're looking at what people's interests are. How can you target those people most effectively? That is it. And I also thought that, but going back to the door knocking and who's knocked on more doors, you or me, Emily Maitlis.
I obviously never, ever knock on anyone. So I never pick up the phone. I never pick up my own phone. I stop calls as soon as they come anywhere near me. I mean, that's how I live.
But that's fine for him to say that, and it's a good rhetorical device to turn it on us. The fact of the matter is, though, what he couldn't answer the question is, well, if people are listening and so disenchanted with Labour and so don't like Keir Starmer and think that Rishi's got good answers, why are the Tories 20 points behind still 3 weeks into this campaign? It's been absolute stasis. Nothing has moved. We are still seeing every day as a Groundhog Day.
So I'm going to throw one figure in there, which is this 45% that some of the pollsters are using, which they say are undecided. Now, 45% of the electorate is massive, right? And Luke Trill from More in Common told us about what he thought might be sort of shy undecideds, people who were cross with the Tories, but ultimately at the last moment would come out and vote. And I still think that is possible, that they are not saying to pollsters, yeah, we're delighted with how things are, because they know that's not the mood of the country, but they might go and vote anyway. And I think Labour is worried by all these slightly hyperbolic polls that suggest they're going to have this amazing majority and amazing swings, and people will end up kind of going, yeah, well, you don't need me. I think I'll stay at home. I'm going to Lanzarote.
Look, 45% of people undecided means there are still an awful lot out there that's worth going after if you're a politician. But you can't just think from that, extrapolate from that, well, they're all going to go back to the Tories. A lot of them are not going to vote, can't be bothered. Sofa wins rather than the polling station. A lot of them are going to go to other parties. A lot of people are going to vote tactically. I think that you can't read too much in. And when the polls have been so consistent across all the different polling organisations, all using slightly different formulas, but all showing Labour with a commanding lead, and Keir Starmer's approval ratings ticking up, it's almost like confirmation bias, where people think, oh, he's obviously going to do well.
The strong man.
Strong man, I quite like him now.
I don't think Starmer's a strong man figure, is he?
Well, I don't know, but you see, look,
The strong candidate, I suppose.
Look, you know, the Labour wobble has come a bit with Diane Abbott. There may be another big Labour wobble to go, and there's still 3 weeks of this campaign left. So, you know, it's early days, but things have stayed pretty consistent. The only thing that's changing is that Starmer's approval ratings are still going up. So in attendance was all the cabinet, and then we were told that 5 ministers would stay behind and answer questions, and we spoke to James Cleverly. But we also spoke to Andrew Mitchell, who is the Deputy Foreign Secretary now. And we kind of ranged a bit wider, not just about the hot button issue of the day, but about the state of the race, the state of the Conservative Party, about character and leadership, and the issues that might sway voters in the election.
Yeah, we started with that question that we posed to you. Are people still listening when the Prime Minister gets up? A very polished speech from the Prime Minister just now. I wonder if the problem for his cabinet colleagues is that you recognise people have just stopped listening.
I don't think they have. I've been, as you would expect, on the doorstep in the royal town of Sutton Coldfield. And what I'm conscious of is there's very little love or interest in Keir Starmer, and not much love for reform either, actually. What there is an enormous number of Tories who need a reason to get out. And I think my biggest enemy is Tory abstentionism. Now, what the speech today did was to make very clear that there are good reasons for Tories going out on tax, on migration, on national security, on education, on apprenticeships, and I think they will resonate with the public. So we know we're well behind. We are the underdog in this election. What Rishi did today was to give us lots of reason to go out there and win back those Tory votes.
Andrew, very interesting you made that local. It sounds like even you, a vintage and a stalwart of Sutton Coldfield, is now nervous you're going to lose your own seat along with many cabinet colleagues.
Well, I have no idea, because that's the wonderful thing about democracy. People will decide, and on July the 4th, that's when people will make up their mind. And in the intervening time, I will be putting my case, my 23 years of service in Sutton Coldfield, and I will be putting the case of the government, and I hope very much that on July the 4th people will come out and support the Conservatives and support me.
Look, Andrew, you said about, you know, that it's tough out there and that you are behind and that you hope Rishi Sunak can turn it round. This is an election about character, about personality. Him skiving off D-Day, which upset so many people, I cannot imagine in a million years you would have thought that was a good idea.
Look, he's apologised for that. He was straight up saying it was a mistake. He regretted it and he apologised.
But it wasn't like a slip of the tongue, was it?
And people should move on, I think, and focus on these critical issues, which are going to determine how people vote on polling day.
But if you say there's a lack of enthusiasm for Keir Starmer, character and personality does matter. He made a calculated choice that it was better to do party things than it was to be with the D-Day veterans. It was deliberate.
Look, these things happen in elections. You people in the media have been running in each election going back for many years what was a big mistake, and this is one of the big mistakes. But the fact is, on polling day, people will vote on the issues the Prime Minister was talking about. And I think today he set out a very clear agenda which will encourage Conservatives not to sit on their hands on polling day, but to come out and vote Conservative.
Just to go back for a moment to Sutton Coldfield, I imagine you wouldn't dream of scarpering off to a safe seat and leaving your constituents in the lurch. Are you embarrassed about what your chairman has done, Richard Holden?
No, we all have to decide what we would do. I have been in Sutton Coldfield for nearly a quarter of a century. I love the town. I've fought for local people across those years, and I intend to continue to do so if they support me and vote for me on July the 4th.
Are you embarrassed, though, about what your party chairman has done?
I don't think embarrassment in politics is a particularly good emotion. You should always seek to do what you think is right.
Do you think that was right?
His seat, I think, was abolished, or was
no. The boundaries were changed.
He's a very key operative, the party chairman, and we need him back in Parliament. And he makes these decisions himself. And,
so it's excusable because of his role.
If he makes a decision, I back his decision.
So obviously the first election campaign I worked on as a journalist was in 1983. I've been to a number of campaign launches. They have dragged us out to Silverstone, which is a fabulous venue. No complaints there. There is coffee, but there is nothing to eat, and we've been here for hours.
Is this the first campaign stop you've done at Silverstone?
Yes.
Okay.
And I tell you what, it's a really clever one, because actually Formula One racing is a huge British success story. So, I mean, I think it was a very smart place
My
to
son
come.
is so jealous that I'm here today, and I missed the video of the one car on the racetrack. But I think what he did was talk about creative industries, and I think that was smart as well, because we've heard so much from this party about policies that lean into, as it were, the reform voter or the socially conservative voter or the older, wealthier pensioner. And actually, I found myself getting quite sort of excited when he talked about film sets, and he talked about cars, and he talked about sport, and he talked about... I want to feel that we're on the verge of some amazing sort of cultural renaissance. You know, this is the place that people come to do that stuff. So I think that was a clever choice. I mean, it's a funny arrangement, isn't it? They tell you what train to get on, and then they put on a bus, and everyone sort of arrives at the media centre, and essentially you can ask for whichever minister or secretary you want, but at the end of the day, you just go and grab somebody, and they either say yes or no.
Silverstone is a great venue. The racetrack is behind us where we're speaking to you from now. But Rishi Sunak was doing it in a cavernous room that was rather echoey. And because of the Brad Pitt filming, we had on our operations note that we weren't allowed to do any kind of filming where there might be Brad Pitt in shot. And so they haven't really used the venue that much.
People kept on coming up to John and going, "Oh my God, Brad Pitt, Brad Pitt." And it was really embarrassing.
Oh,
really
Maitless.
hard. Just keeping them all away. Yeah.
Maitless,
Yeah.
stop. People, that's what happens to me all the time. Me, Brad, me. It's so interchangeable.
So the circus basically has now left. This all happens in the space of a very quick 2.5 hours, and then Silverstone will be left in peace, relative peace again. And I guess if you were Rishi Sunak's team, if you were the ministers around, the Prime Minister today, you'd be thinking, yeah, we got away with that. It didn't set the world alight, but he stabilised the ship. Am I allowed a ship metaphor here?
No, because we've got to do racing metaphors.
Yes. Go on. Kept the wheels
steering,
on. Yeah.
Steering.
Yeah.
He's, he hasn't gone off. He's got back on the track.
Back on track.
Obviously.
Yeah.
All I would say is, how do they make this campaign last for 3 weeks more without boring people rigid? Because, we've had 3 weeks of arguments. We have got the Liberal Democrat Manifesto yesterday, Tories today, Labour next week. If voting was Thursday week, you'd think, fine, okay, let's head down, let's go to the finish line. Sustaining people's interest in these policies for another 3 weeks, I think is going to be a tall order.
Well, I have taken that challenge upon myself, and in the interests of our newsagents listeners, we are bringing you, after the break, the answers to the was this a Reform Party policy or an El Salvador policy quiz, coming up right now.
Dear newsagents listeners, we gave you a quiz on Sunday. I was off yesterday and I was waiting for the results, but I left Emily and Lewis in charge. And did they give you the results of the quiz that we did on Sunday? No. Maitless, what have you got to say for yourself?
Very deeply disappointed listeners, and I'm sorry about that. We're at the top of the charts today because presumably people tuned in trying to find...
Are we at the top of the charts?
Again, those answers. OK, here they are. So this is what we asked you. Reform UK prison policy or Nayib Bukele policy, the president of El Salvador. Automatic life sentence for violent offenders. Do you remember what you said?
I think I probably said reform.
And it is reform.
Yes.
Helicopters and drones to be used by everyday police forces.
I can't remember what I said. Reform.
El Salvador. We don't have enough helicopters, quite frankly. Or probably drones. Police leaders replaced with military veterans. Reform UK or El Salvador?
I think you're going to have to give the answers. I can't remember what I said.
Reform.
Right.
Young offenders facing high-intensity training camps. It is reform. Question 5. No bail for people charged with organised crime.
I thought that was reform, but
then we had to remember Donald Trump. And
Yeah.
Farage is very close to people who might be convicted of organised crime. So that is El Salvador.
a little mafia gag got in there.
Crackdown on cash-only businesses like barbers.
That
The
has
key
to be
word,
reform.
It is reform. And 2 more. Automatic prison sentences for possession of a knife.
Yeah, reform.
Reform. Last one. Construction of a 40,000 capacity mega prison.
El Salvador.
El Salvador.
So, okay, Lewis and me were competing against each other. Who won?
Definitely you.
Yes!
Because he's not here.
We'll see you tomorrow.
Bye for now.
Bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.